So first of all, coming on to CSF secretion, circulation and collection. CSF is basically derived through plasma ultrafiltration and it is also through secretion from the choroid plexus and it's produced at the rate of about 500 ml per day. The basic functions are it provides physical support, collects waste and circulate nutrients and lubricates the CNS. So we can see in this diagram that this is the choroid plexus which is the site of production of CSF. From here, the CSF will move down the spinal canal and it will go into the subarachnoid space and will be reabsorbed through the arachnoid granulation. So normal CSF volume in adults is around 90 to 150 ml. In neonates, it's around 10 to 60 ml. And total CSF volume is replaced every 5 to 7 hours. Collection methods are lumbar puncture, cisternal puncture, lateral cervical puncture, shunts, and cannulas. Opening pressure is generally around 90 to 180 mm of water. Now, what are the indications of a lumbar puncture? It could be any kind of meningitis, bacterial, viral, fungal, or bacterial tuberculosis, subarachnoid hemorrhage, any inflammatory or autoimmune disorder of the CNS like multiple sclerosis, CNS syphilis, or any malignancy, meningeal malignancy, or any subdural hematoma. And also it can be used to provide some medications, for example, any anesthetic or, for example, any kind of chemo and also to reduce the intracranial pressure in idiopathic intracranial hypertension or pseudotumor cerebri, we use a lumbar puncture. The emergency, the indications for doing a lumbar puncture would include any suspected malignancy, subarachnoid hemorrhage, or meningitis. Now, there are certain contraindications of lumbar puncture, like an infection in the overlying skin, or relative contraindications like papilledema or increased intracranial pressure due to any space occupying lesion, bleeding diathesis or a platelet count of less than 50,000, severe pulmonary disease or respiratory distress. Now we'll talk about the lumbar puncture needle or the LP needle. This is a stainless steel needle that we normally have. This will be kept in the exam in the spotters. And this is the stillet that is there inside. You can see it in this disposable needle that this is the stillet. And this is the hollow needle with the beveled end. And this comes in various different gauges. So here we have a color coding. Like different gauges, the length will always remain as 90 mm and then you have these color codings. So normally we use a 20 gauge needle which is black in color. Now coming to the site from where we're going to do this lumbar puncture, it's usually between L3, L4 or L4, L5. And this is the position of the patient, a lateral recumbent position in which head is flexed and the hip is flexed. So or the patient could be seated also in the same position. So the structures which are basically crossed are skin, subcutaneous layer, the back muscles, supraspinous ligament, interspinous ligament, ligamentum flavum, and epidural space to finally enter the subarachnoid space. So what are the complications of a lumbar puncture? It could be a post-puncture headache. So that's why we generally prefer that a patient should be at least lying supine for 2 to 3 hours after the procedure. It could be any infection, which if introduced into the subarachnoid space would lead to meningitis, subdural hematoma. It could be a dry tab because there's some sort of an obstructive lesion over there or fibrosis. There could be herniation of the brain. Now, this normally happens when there's increased intracranial pressure, especially if the intracranial pressure is above 200 mm of water. We generally don't allow more than 1 to 2 ml of CSF to be taken out. Or it could be a subarachnoid epidermal cyst, which is if we accidentally introduce a skin tag into the subarachnoid space. Now, the glass tubes are generally avoided for the collection of CSF. This is because the cells can get stuck to the sides. And serially, if you look at this diagram, we should be collecting it in 4 tubes, 1 ml, 2 ml, 1 and 1 ml. First one is for chemistry like glucose and protein and serology. Second is for microbiological examination like gram stain, AFP stain, India ink or various cultures. Third is which is of most relevance to us, which is a total cell count and a differential cell count. And the fourth one will be for specialized cytology or immunology or additional tests. Now, this specimen should be delivered to the lab and should be processed within 1 hour of collection because then cells start to degrade very fast and also glycolysis occurs, so the glucose levels is going to drop very fast. So, routine lab tests that we do for CSF are opening CSF pressure, TLC, DLC, glucose and total protein. Optional ones include culture, gram stain, AFP, fungal and bacterial antigens, enzymes. There's a lot of things that you can do with the optional testing. So opening pressure is measured by the manometer, which is a preset instrument that we attach to the hub of the needle. And when we have to measure the pressure, we extend the patient's leg gently, bring it back to normal position, and then measure the pressure, which is normally like 60 to 180 mm of water in adults and 10 to 100 mm of water in children less than 8 years. The causes of an increased intracranial pressure could be a tense patient, intracranial mass, meningitis or cerebral edema or subarachnoid hemorrhage. Decreased ICP occurs in leakage of fluid after trauma or a complete spinal block. Now, the composition of normal CSF protein is 15 to 45 mg per deciliter, which is about 1% of the plasma proteins. Glucose is 50 to 80 mg per deciliter, which is around 2/3 of the plasma glucose levels, or 60%. Then we have urea, uric acid, creatinine, cholesterol, and cells should be around 0 to 5 lymphocytes generally per microliter. Characteristics of normal CSF include that its appearance is clear, a pH between 7.28 to 7.32, and there's no clot formation on standing normally. Gross examination of CSF, we have the quantity, color, appearance, clot formation, viscosity, and xanthochromia. Coming to the color, first of all, normal CSF is crystal clear, it's colorless, and its viscosity is like that of water. So, abnormal CSF will appear cloudy or frankly purulent or pigment tinged. The turbidity in CSF will come about if the leukocyte count is over 200 cells per microliter or the RBC count is over 400 per microliter. Microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, amoeba are present. Radiographic contrast material or epidural fat has been aspirated, or protein levels are more than 150 mg per deciliter. Clot formation normally occurs in traumatic TAPS or in Freund syndrome, which is like a complete spinal block basically, or in suppurative or tubercular meningitis. Clot is not formed in a patient with subarachnoid hemorrhage. Viscosity, there are these metastatic mucin producing adenocarcinoma. So if there is a metastatic lesion from that or cryptococcal meningitis or by the liquid nucleus pulposus. So now coming to xanthochromia, this is a pale pink to yellow colored supernatant of the centrifuge CSF. And it is generally due to RBC, lysis, and hemoglobin breakdown. This is observed after 2 to 4 hours of onset of a subarachnoid hemorrhage and is basically derived from bilirubin. And brown xanthochromia, if we are finding, then it is seen in meningeal metastatic melanoma. So these are some other causes because of which there could be a xanthochromia. It could be carotenoids, melanin, or rifampicin therapy. Now there's something called as bloody CSF. This is different. This is like frank blood if it is present. And the causes could be subarachnoid hemorrhage, intracerebral hemorrhage, cerebral infarct, or a traumatic spinal tap. So here are the basic differences between a traumatic lumbar puncture and a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So when you have a traumatic puncture, usually the blood is more in initial tubes. Later on, it disappears. Whereas in subarachnoid hemorrhage, it's a uniform blood throughout and it will not clot on standing. Whereas in the first one, in traumatic LP, there'll always be a clot on formation. And then if after 1 hour of collection, if you observe the supernatant, like we can see here in this diagram, it's generally clear for a traumatic tap. Whereas in subarachnoid hemorrhage, we find after 12 hours, there's a xanthochromia, pink or yellowish tinge. Now on microscopy, if we see in the traumatic lumbar puncture, there'll be progressive decrease of the red cell counts in the later tubes. Whereas in subarachnoid hemorrhage, there's a uniform RBC count that we find in all the tubes, along with hemosiderin-laden macrophages. Latex agglutination test that we get done for D-dimer, which is a fibrin degradation product, is negative in traumatic LP but positive here. CSF pressure is normal in a traumatic LP. In subarachnoid hemorrhage, it's increased. And CSF fluid protein, this is normal in traumatic LP, whereas increased in subarachnoid hemorrhage. Now coming to the microscopic examination, we basically have TLC, DLC, and the total leukocyte count in CSF is done by a manual method and an automated method. So the manual method is whenever there's an increased cell count in CSF, it's called pleocytosis. And our sample, the one that we're using, is the one from tube 3. No dilution is generally needed. If cloudy or turbid, we will need a 1:20 dilution, in which we use 0.05 ml of CSF and 0.95 ml of Turk's fluid. Now, then we'll basically put a cover slip on your newborn chamber and then it is charged, and cells which are counted in these four peripheral squares, which are marked as W. A total of these cells, and then this formula is used to calculate the TLC. While in automated method, normally we're using the counter, which gives a poor precision. And flow cytometry also can be used. That's more rapid and reliable, but again, it's an expensive method. Now, the normal leukocyte count in adults is about 0 to 5 cells per millimeter cube. In neonates, it's a bit higher. It's about 0 to 30 cells per millimeter cube. And this is how we give the corrected WBC count if there is some sort of a traumatic tap or there's blood because of any other reason. Now coming to differential count, again in the chamber, that's usually a very poor precision. What we would prefer is that we make a slide after cytocentrifugation. That's a recommended method of choice. There's an instrument called the cytospin, because of which we're able to make this smear basically, and on that we'll stain and get the differential leukocyte count. There are other methods as well, but this is the best one, the cytocentrifuge method. Normal cells that you see in CSF are lymphocytes and monocytes in the ratio of 70:30. Monocytes are generally more in neonates and children. Choroid plexus and ependymal cells can also be found. Cartilage, ganglion cells, and artificial admixture of hematopoietic cells can be there. Some contaminants like fungus and bacteria can be there. There could be erythrocytes due to a traumatic tap. Small clusters of neutrophils might also be there sometimes. So now coming to when will there be a neutrophilia in CSF? When you only predominantly see neutrophils and the total leukocyte count is elevated, it could be because of any kind of meningitis, other infections like an abscess or subdural empyema. It could be following a seizure or CNS hemorrhage or a CNS infarct or any other kind of metastasis of foreign body. So this is how the neutrophils would appear on CSF examination. And this is after staining. Increased CSF lymphocytosis generally happens in viral and tubercular meningitis, more so in these two. And degenerative disorders that are there, like subacute sclerosing panencephalitis or multiple sclerosis or Guillain-Barré syndrome. In these, you have increased CSF lymphocytes. Even other inflammatory disorders, you might have these increased CSF lymphocytes. So these are how the lymphocytes would appear. This is the normal ratio that you have, and these are how the monocytes would appear. Now, CSF eosinophilia, this will be common after post-surgery or acute polyneuritis, fungal infections in response to foreign material, or any idiopathic hypereosinophilic syndrome or parasitic infection. So these are how the eosinophils appear characteristically. This is from a child with malfunctioning ventricular shunt. Tumor cells that you can find in CSF, basically CSF examination for leukemic patients has the highest specificity. Then you can even find metastatic carcinoma and primary CNS malignancy cells in the CSF. So coming to leukemia, generally ALL is more frequently present with a leukemic involvement of CSF. A cell count of over 5 cells per microliter, along with an unequivocal morphology of lymphoblasts, if you proved in the CSF, that will be a proof of your leukemic infiltration in CSF. And usually ALL is very common. It occurs in children mostly. And this is the immunohistochemical profile. Immature myeloid cells can also be there, which are blasts generally having large nuclei, irregular nuclear membranes, a powdery chromatin, and bizarrely shaped nucleoli with abnormal mitosis. So this is a picture which is showing us these ALL blast cells that are there in the CSF. And this is a picture showing us AML blasts, which is mostly in adults, the leukemic infiltration in CSF. Now, lymphoma cells can also be found in CSF. There's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which can involve leptomeninges. So there can be various kind of lymphomas which will be involving the CNS. And you can even have primary CNS lymphomas which involve the CSF.